Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now, let's step inside. No human contact. Inside America's Supermax prisons, there's a prison in the United States where human contact is almost completely eliminated. No handshakes, no shared meals, no conversations between inmates. In this place, silence is not a side effect. It is a design. Behind layers of reinforced concrete and steel sits ADX Florence, a facility so secure that it was never meant to be seen from the inside, only survived. This is not a prison built for rehabilitation. It was built for control. Here, inmates spend up to 23 hours a day alone, locked inside concrete cells where the walls absorb sound. The windows don't show the outside world, and even the air feels restricted. Meals arrive through a narrow slot in a steel door. Recreation happens in isolation. Movement is choreographed to prevent human interaction. In many cases, the only voices inmates hear for years come through the door, filtered, distant, and brief. No touch, no eye contact, no community. For the men held here, punishment doesn't end with the sentence. It continues every day, in silence. Some of the inmates inside this prison are among the most dangerous individuals in America. Others are here because no other prison would take them. Gang leaders, terrorists, men who attacked guards, men who lost control. But once inside, they are all treated the same, reduced to a number, sealed behind concrete, and removed from human society. Psychologists have warned for decades about the effects of prolonged isolation: hallucinations, memory loss, paranoia, emotional collapse. Yet this system continues to exist, quietly, legally, and largely out of public view. This documentary is not about whether these inmates are innocent or guilty. It is about what happens when human contact is taken away completely. How does a person survive years without touch? What happens to the mind when silence becomes permanent? And can anyone truly leave a place designed to erase human connection? This is no human contact. This is life inside America's Supermax prisons. What is a Supermax prison? Before a person ever arrives at a place like ADX Florence, a decision has already been made, not just about where they will be held, but about how much of their humanity will be removed. Supermax prisons were not created by accident. They were not the result of a single crime or one violent incident. They are the outcome of decades of fear, control, and belief that some people cannot exist safely around others. To understand Supermax prisons, we first need to understand what came before them. For most of American history, prisons were divided into basic categories: minimum, medium, and maximum security. Even at the highest levels, inmates still live around other people. They worked jobs. They shared yards. They spoke to one another. Violence existed, but so did movement, routine, and limited social contact. That system began to crack in the late 20th century. By the 1970s and 1980s, American prisons were overcrowded, understaffed, and increasingly violent. Gang activity expanded behind bars. High-profile inmate attacks made national headlines. Guards were assaulted. Hostage situations occurred. Riots broke out in facilities across the country. For prison administrators, the question became urgent. What do you do with inmates who cannot be controlled? Even inside maximum security prisons, the answer was separation. At first, this separation was temporary. Inmates who caused problems were placed in segregation units, sometimes called the whole or solitary confinement, for days or weeks at a time. These units were meant to restore order, not to become permanent homes. But over time, segregation stopped being temporary. Prison systems began identifying a category of inmates they labeled as the worst of the worst. Individuals considered too violent, too disruptive, or too influential to be housed anywhere else. And instead of isolating them briefly, authorities decided to isolate them indefinitely. This was the birth of the Supermax prison. A Supermax facility is not simply a more secure prison. It is a completely different concept. Unlike traditional prisons, Supermax facilities are designed around total isolation. Every architectural decision, from the shape of the cells to the thickness of the walls, is meant to limit interaction, movement, and stimulation. Inmates are not managed through routine or social structure. They are managed through control. In a Supermax prison, the cell becomes the center of existence. Cells are typically made entirely of concrete, including the bed, desk, and stool. Windows, if present at all, are narrow and positioned so inmates cannot see outside or track the passage of time. Sound is muted. Light is artificial. Even the air circulation is carefully regulated. These cells are not designed to be lived in. They are designed to be endured. Movement outside the cell is rare and calculated. When inmates are moved, it happens alone. Shackles are used. Multiple officers supervise a single transfer. Paths are cleared so inmates never cross one another. Human contact is treated as a risk. Meals are delivered through slots in steel doors. Medical visits often occur through barriers. Recreation, when allowed, takes place in enclosed concrete yards where inmates remain isolated even while outside their cells. In some facilities, inmates can go years without physically touching another human being. This level of isolation is not accidental. It is intentional. Prison officials argue that Supermax prisons are necessary to protect staff, other inmates, and the public. They describe them as containment facilities, places meant to neutralize individuals who have demonstrated an ability to harm others regardless of setting. In theory, Supermax prisons remove the most dangerous inmates from the general population, reducing violence across the system. But critics argue that this solution creates a different kind of damage. Psychologists and human rights organizations have long warned that prolonged isolation can cause severe mental harm. Studies show that the human brain depends on social interaction, sensory input, and routine to function normally. When those elements are removed, the effects can be devastating. Inmates in long-term isolation have reported hallucinations, panic attacks, memory loss, and an inability to regulate emotions. Some begin talking to themselves. Others lose track of time entirely. In extreme cases, inmates engage in self-harm just to feel something real. Despite these warnings, Supermax prisons expanded rapidly in the 1990s and early 2000s. States across the country built their own versions. The federal government went further, creating a facility designed to hold inmates who could not be managed anywhere else. That facility will become the most secure prison in the United States. What separates a Supermax prison from all others is not just security, it is philosophy. Traditional prisons, at least in theory, balance punishment with rehabilitation. Supermax prisons do not operate on that assumption. They are designed around risk elimination, not personal change. Inmates are not expected to socialize. They are not expected to participate. They are expected to comply. And for many, compliance is not enough to earn release from isolation. Unlike disciplinary segregation, which has a clear end date, Supermax confinement can last years or even decades. Reviews exist, but they're often slow, opaque, and difficult to navigate. Progress is measured not by growth, but by the absence of problems. Don't cause trouble. Don't speak out of turn. Don't fail. Even then, release is not guaranteed. For the men inside these facilities, Supermax incarceration is not just a sentence. It is a condition, a form of existence defined by silence, repetition, and distance from the rest of the world. And while the public rarely sees these places, they represent the most extreme edge of the American prison system. They raise uncomfortable questions. How much isolation is too much? Can control replace rehabilitation? And what happens when a system designed to contain danger begins to damage the mind itself? To answer those questions, we need to look at who gets sent to places like this, and why some inmates are deemed unfit for any other prison in the country. Who gets sent to America's most extreme prison? By the time an inmate is sent to ADX Florence, the prison system has already decided something crucial, that this person cannot be managed anywhere else. This decision is not made lightly, but it is also not made in a courtroom. No judge sentences someone directly to a Supermax prison. There is no jury. There is no public hearing. The process happens quietly, inside the federal prison system, far away from public view. And once that decision is made, it can follow an inmate for years, sometimes for life. Not a sentence, a classification. Supermax confinement is not technically a punishment. It is a classification. That distinction matters. Because while a sentence has a fixed length, a classification can be changed, delayed, extended, or maintained indefinitely based on behavior assessments and internal reviews. In theory, this system is meant to be flexible. In reality, it often becomes permanent. The inmates sent to ADX Florence fall into several categories, but they all share one thing in common. At some point, the system decided they were too dangerous to exist around others. Category 1. Extreme violence inside prison. Some inmates arrive at ADX Florence not because of what they did outside prison, but because of what they did after they were incarcerated. These are inmates who assaulted or killed other inmates, attacked correctional officers, participated in riots or hostage situations, used weapons improvised from everyday objects. In maximum security prisons, violence is expected. But when an inmate repeatedly demonstrates that no level of supervision is enough, administrators look for separation, not discipline. Supermax becomes a final option. In these cases, ADX Florence is not about punishment. It is about containment. Category 2, terrorism and national security. One of the most well-known groups held at ADX Florence are inmates convicted of terrorism-related offenses. These individuals are not only considered physically dangerous, but ideologically dangerous. Prison officials fear that even limited contact could allow them to radicalize other inmates, coordinate attacks, communicate with outside networks. For these inmates, isolation is treated as a security measure, a way to cut off influence as much as movement. Mail is monitored. Visits are restricted. Communication is tightly controlled. The goal is not rehabilitation. The goal is silence. Category 3, gang leadership and organized crime. Prison gangs operate differently from street gangs. Inside prison, power is built on reputation, communication, and fear. Even a single inmate, if influential enough, can control violence across an entire facility. Gang leaders don't need physical contact to give orders. They need access. Supermax confinement removes that access. Inmates linked to organized prison gangs, cartels, mafia-style crime groups are often placed in ADX Florence to sever their ability to command others. Even indirect communication is considered a threat. Category 4, escape risks. Some inmates are not placed in Supermax because they are violent, but because they are capable. These are inmates who attempted escape, successfully escaped and were recaptured, demonstrated advanced planning skills, exploited security weaknesses. In the prison system, intelligence is danger. ADX Florence was designed to eliminate opportunity. No shared movement, no blind spots, no predictable routines. Escape is not just unlikely, it is considered virtually impossible. Category 5, management problems. This category is the most controversial. Some inmates sent to ADX Florence are not killers, terrorists, or gang leaders. Instead, they are labeled as management problems. These are inmates who refuse to follow orders, file excessive grievances, challenge authority, are repeatedly written up for nonviolent infractions. In theory, these inmates should be manageable through discipline. In practice, they are sometimes removed simply because they are difficult. This raises a troubling question. At what point does isolation become a response to inconvenience rather than danger? The decision process. The decision to send an inmate to ADX Florence is made by classification committees within the Bureau of Prisons. These committees review disciplinary records, intelligence reports, psychological evaluations, incident histories. The inmate may be informed of the decision, but they have limited ability to challenge it. There is no courtroom defense, no public advocate, no jury of peers. Once transferred, the burden shifts to the inmate to prove they are safe enough to leave. And proving that from inside a concrete cell is one of the hardest challenges in the prison system. The psychological label. Perhaps the most powerful factor in Supermax placement is not behavior, but perception. Once an inmate is labeled extremely dangerous, high risk, unmanageable, that label follows them. Every action is viewed through that lens. Every mistake confirms the label. Every emotional response becomes evidence. Isolation reinforces the very behaviors used to justify it. The length of stay. Some inmates remain at ADX Florence for a few years. Others remain for decades. There are inmates who arrived in their 20s and are still there in their 50s, having spent most of their adult lives without human contact. Release is possible through a step-down program, but progress is slow, rigid, and unforgiving. One infraction can reset years of compliance. For many, ADX Florence becomes not a phase, but a permanent condition. The moral question. Supporters argue that Supermax prisons are necessary. They point to reduced violence in general populations. They argue that some individuals have proven, repeatedly, that they cannot coexist safely with others. Critics argue that total isolation does not eliminate danger, it transforms it. They question whether prolonged deprivation damages the mind beyond repair. They question whether control has replaced justice. And they ask whether a system that removes human contact entirely can still claim to be humane. We will follow what happens after the decision is made. The transfer, the intake process, and the first hours inside a prison designed to eliminate human connection. The transfer and arrival at ADX Florence. Long before an inmate ever sees the walls of ADX Florence, the transition into Supermax confinement has already begun. It does not start with a door closing. It starts with silence. For many inmates, the first sign is sudden. A brief notice, a short conversation, sometimes no explanation at all. An inmate is told to pack what little they are allowed to bring. Personal property is inventoried. Letters, photos, and paperwork are reviewed and restricted. There is no farewell to other inmates, no chance to explain, no opportunity to prepare mentally. Transfers to Supermax prisons are designed to be disorienting. The transport process. Supermax transfers do not resemble ordinary prison movements. In many cases, inmates are moved during early morning hours. Shackles are applied, wrists, waist, ankles, even if the inmate has no history of escape attempts. Blackout glasses may be used to limit visibility. Communication is minimal. The purpose is not just security. It is control. Inmates are often transported alone or with only a handful of others, separated by barriers. Routes are intentionally unpredictable. Stops are limited. The inmate may not know where they're going, only that they are being removed from the environment they once knew. For some, the transfer lasts hours. For others, days. During this time, inmates exist in a suspended state, no longer part of one prison, not yet inside another. Meals are basic. Sleep is disrupted. The body adjusts to stress long before the mind does. Arrival without ceremony. There is no dramatic entrance when an inmate arrives at a Supermax prison. No announcement, no confrontation, no welcome. Arrival is quiet, procedural, and deliberately impersonal. Vehicles enter secure perimeters through multiple checkpoints. Gates close behind them before the next opens. Each barrier reinforces the same message. Movement is permitted only in one direction. Inmates are removed one at a time. There is no opportunity to observe other prisoners. There is no sense of scale. Everything is compartmentalized. Intake and strip search. The intake process is exhaustive. Inmates are strip searched repeatedly, not as punishment, but as protocol. Every item is examined. Clothing is replaced with institutional garments. Property is reduced to approved essentials. Medical screenings follow, often conducted through barriers. Psychological evaluations are initiated almost immediately, though interaction is limited. Questions are brief. Responses are accorded. Behavior is observed. At this stage, inmates are not evaluated for comfort or adjustment. They are evaluated for compliance. Every movement matters. Every hesitation is noted. The first cell. For most inmates, the first cell inside a Supermax prison is the moment reality becomes permanent. The door closes slowly. The lock engages with a sound that echoes. Inside, the cell is stark. Concrete walls. Concrete bed. A narrow shelf that serves as a desk. A sink-in toilet combined into a single metal unit. If there is a window, it does not face the outside world. It may allow light, but not information. The position prevents inmates from tracking time, weather, or seasons. Sound behaves differently here. Voices do not travel. Footsteps fade quickly. The cell is not meant to be personalized. It is meant to be occupied. Orientation without orientation. In traditional prisons, intake includes orientation, explanations of routines, rules, and expectations. In Supermax confinement, orientation is minimal. Inmates learn the rules by living them. Lights turn on and off at set times. Meals arrive through a slot without warning. Movement outside the cell happens rarely and always alone. Requests are made in writing. Responses may take days or weeks. There is no feedback loop, no reassurance. This uncertainty is intentional. The first 72 hours, the first days inside Supermax confinement are often the most destabilizing. The body is adjusting to restricted movement, artificial light, limited sound, isolation. The mind struggles even more. Some inmates experience immediate anxiety. Others feel numb. Time slows down. Minutes stretch. Hours lose meaning. Without conversation or physical interaction, the brain begins searching for stimulation. Some inmates pace their cells. Others count tiles. Some sleep excessively. Others cannot sleep at all. There is nothing to distract from thought. Observation without interaction. During this initial period, inmates are closely monitored, but rarely engaged. Cameras observe continuously. Officers check cells at intervals. Medical staff review reports. But communication remains limited. This creates a paradox. Inmates are constantly watched, yet profoundly alone. They are visible, but unheard. Psychological impact begins immediately. Even inmates who have spent time in segregation report that Supermax confinement feels different. The permanence is heavier. The structure is tighter. The silence is deeper. In segregation units, inmates know there is an end date. In Supermax confinement, the timeline is unclear, sometimes undefined. This uncertainty amplifies stress. Inmates begin asking questions they cannot answer. How long will I be here? What do I need to do to leave? Who decides? The lack of clear answers becomes part of the punishment. Loss of social identity. One of the first things inmates lose upon arrival is social identity. There are no groups to join, no hierarchies to navigate, no reputations to build or maintain. In traditional prisons, identity is shaped by interaction, by conflict, alliances, and routine. In Supermax confinement, identity collapses inward. An inmate becomes a number, a file, a behavior profile. The absence of social feedback begins altering how inmates perceive themselves. The message of arrival. Every aspect of the transfer and intake process communicates the same message. You are here because the system believes you cannot be trusted around others. This belief becomes a foundation of Supermax confinement. It shapes how staff interact. It shapes how progress is measured. It shapes how long an inmate remains inside. And once established, it is difficult to escape. Life inside the cell. Once the door closes at ADX Florence, life becomes very small. Not metaphorically, physically. For most inmates, the cell is roughly the size of a standard bathroom. Concrete walls surround every direction. The bed, desk, and stool are molded into the structure itself, leaving nothing movable, nothing personal. There is no clutter because there is nothing to clutter. The cell is not designed to feel temporary. It is designed to feel permanent. The architecture of control. Every detail inside a Supermax cell serves a purpose. The concrete absorbs sound, limiting echoes and reducing noise. This prevents inmates from communicating with one another, even unintentionally. The door is solid steel, with a narrow slot that opens only when staff choose. Windows, if present, do not face outward in a meaningful way. They are positioned high, narrow, or angled so inmates cannot see the horizon, the sky clearly, or other people. Time becomes abstract. Without visual cues, no sunsets, no changing weather, days blur together. Morning and night are marked only by artificial light and routine. This is not accidental. It is deliberate sensory restriction. Meals through a slot. Food is not served in a dining hall. There is no communal eating. Meals arrive through the slot in the door. Silently, an officer opens the slot, slides a tray through, and closes it again. There is no conversation, no eye contact, sometimes no visible human presence at all. The inmate eats alone, inches from where the tray entered. Once finished, the tray is returned the same way. For some inmates, this routine repeats thousands of times without variation. Over time, even hunger loses urgency. Meals become markers of time rather than moments of relief. Movement without interaction. When inmates leave their cells, which is rare, it happens under strict control. They are shackled at the wrists, waist, and ankles. Doors open and close in sequence, ensuring no two inmates ever occupy the same space. Officers maintain distance. Commands are short. Interaction is minimal. Even medical visits often occur through barriers or with restraints in place. Human presence exists, but always separated, filtered, and controlled. Recreation and isolation. Recreation does not mean freedom. In Supermax confinement, recreation often consists of 1 hour alone in a small concrete enclosure, sometimes called a dog run. There is no equipment, no grass, no interaction, just concrete walls and open air above. For some inmates, this is the only time they see the sky directly. Even here, isolation continues. Silence is routine. Inside the cell, silence becomes constant. There are no voices from neighboring cells. No shouting. No arguments. No laughter. The absence of sound becomes so complete that inmates often report hearing their own heartbeat, breathing, or internal thoughts more clearly than ever before. At first, silence feels oppressive. Then it becomes normal. That normalization is one of the most powerful effects of long-term isolation. Mental adaptation. The human mind adapts, even to extreme conditions. Inmates develop coping mechanisms, counting steps, memorizing routines, replaying memories repeatedly, talking aloud to themselves. Some create strict schedules to impose structure. Others withdraw completely, sleeping for long periods to escape awareness. These adaptations are not signs of comfort. They are survival responses. Loss of external identity. In traditional prisons, inmates maintain identity through interaction, roles, reputation, conflicts, alliances. In Supermax confinement, those structures disappear. There is no audience, no social feedback, no confirmation of self. Over time, identity becomes internal and fragile. Some inmates report feeling as if they are slowly disappearing, not physically, but psychologically. The passage of time. Days are indistinguishable. Weeks feel identical. Years pass quietly. Without events or milestones, time loses shape. Inmates measure duration by meal cycles, light changes, rare reviews. This distortion of time is one of the most damaging aspects of long-term isolation. Behavior as currency. In Supermax prisons, behavior becomes the only form of communication. Compliance is tracked. Infractions are recorded. Progress is measured quietly. There are no rewards for engagement, only consequences for deviation. This creates an environment where inmates learn to suppress emotion entirely. Anger, frustration, despair all become liabilities. The absence of touch. Perhaps the most profound deprivation is physical contact. No handshakes, no pats on the shoulder, no accidental brushes in passing. For years, some inmates do not experience any form of human touch. Psychologists note that touch is fundamental to emotional regulation. Without it, stress responses intensify and emotional numbness becomes common. Inmates often stop craving touch altogether, not because the need disappears, but because the mind adapts by shutting it down. Existence reduced. Inside a Supermax cell, life is reduced to essentials. Eat, sleep, wait. There are no choices, no spontaneity, no unpredictability. This reduction strips away not just freedom, but complexity. The long-term cost. What begins as confinement slowly becomes transformation. Inmates do not simply endure isolation, they are reshaped by it. Cognitive function slow, emotional expression narrows. Social skills atrophy. Even those who eventually leave Supermax confinement often struggle to reintegrate into normal prison environments, let alone society. What no human contact does to the human mind. Long-term isolation does not arrive all at once. It settles in slowly, quietly, often without warning. Inside places like ADX Florence, the damage caused by isolation is not marked by a single breaking point. Instead, it unfolds in stages, changing how the mind works, how emotions are processed, and how reality itself is perceived. This is not a theory. It is a documented psychological response to prolonged deprivation. The brain is not built for isolation. Human beings are social by design. From early childhood, the brain develops through interaction, facial expressions, touch, conversation, conflict, and connection. These experiences regulate emotion, reinforce identity, and anchor perception. When those inputs are removed, the brain does not remain neutral. It begins to adapt, and that adaptation often comes at cost. In Supermax confinement, inmates are deprived of meaningful conversation, physical touch, visual stimulation, social feedback, unstructured choice. What remains is silence, repetition, and self-generated thought. Over time, the brain turns inward. Stage 1. Heightened anxiety and hyper-awareness. For many inmates, the earliest psychological effect is anxiety. In the absence of external stimuli, the mind becomes hyper-focused on internal sensations. Heart rate, breathing, minor sounds, thoughts looping endlessly. Small disturbances feel magnified. A sound in the hallway, a delayed meal, a light turning on unexpectedly. The body remains in a state of low-level alertness, constantly anticipating something that never arrives. This prolonged stress response exhausts the nervous system. Sleep becomes irregular. Appetite changes. Emotional regulation weakens. Stage 2. Cognitive distortion. As days blend into weeks, cognition begins to shift. Inmates report difficulty concentrating. Reading becomes harder. Thoughts fragment. Memory slips. Not because information is lost, but because there is nothing new to anchor it. Time perception deteriorates. Minutes feel like hours. Weeks disappear without notice. Without markers, conversations, events, variation, the brain loses its ability to organize experience chronologically. This distortion creates a sense of unreality. Stage 3. Hallucinations and sensory deprivation. In extreme cases, the brain begins to create its own stimulation. Inmates report hearing voices, seeing movement that isn't there, feeling phantom sensations, experiencing vivid, intrusive memories. These are not signs of weakness or pre-existing mental illness. They are known responses to sensory deprivation. When deprived of input, the brain fills a void, sometimes convincingly, sometimes terrifyingly. For inmates, the inability to verify reality through interaction makes these experiences even more destabilizing. There is no one to ask, "Did you hear that? Did you see that?" Reality becomes subjective. Stage 4. Emotional flattening. As isolation continues, emotional range narrows. Inmates often report that intense emotions, anger, fear, sadness, gradually fade. What replaces them is a muted emotional state. This is not calm. It is numbness. The mind reduces emotional output as a survival mechanism. Feeling less becomes easier than feeling constantly overwhelmed. But numbness has consequences. Motivation declines. Hope weakens. The ability to care about oneself or the future erodes. Stage 5. Identity erosion. Perhaps the most profound effect of long-term isolation is the loss of identity. Identity is reinforced through interaction, through feedback, through conflict and connection. In Supermax confinement, there is no mirror. No one reacts to your words. No one challenges your ideas. No one confirms your existence. Over time, inmates report feeling less like people and more like observers of their own thoughts. Some describe it as fading. Others describe it as shrinking. The self becomes quieter, thinner, harder to access. Self-harm as stimulation. In some cases, inmates turn to self-harm, not as a desire to die, but as a way to feel something real. Pain becomes grounding. Blood becomes proof of existence. This behavior is often misunderstood. It is not always suicidal. It is sometimes an attempt to reconnect with sensation, the paradox of control. Supermax prisons are designed to control behavior, but psychological deterioration often undermines that goal. As inmates become more mentally unstable, compliance becomes harder, not easier. Emotional outbursts, withdrawal, or erratic behavior may increase. These behaviors then reinforce the original justification for isolation. The system becomes self-validating. The difficulty of recovery. When inmates eventually leave Supermax confinement, the damage does not disappear. Many struggle to hold conversations, interpret social cues, manage noise, regulate emotion. Even basic interaction can feel overwhelming. Some inmates request a return to isolation because it feels safer than unpredictability. This is one of the most troubling outcomes of prolonged solitary confinement. The environment designed to control danger can make normal human contact feel dangerous. The ethical question. Supporters argue that Supermax prisons protect lives. Critics argue that psychological harm inflicted over years constitutes a form of cruelty, even when legally sanctioned. The debate is not simple, but one truth remains consistent across decades of research. Extended isolation changes the human mind, not temporarily, not superficially, fundamentally, a system out of sight. Most of the public will never see these effects firsthand. They happen quietly, behind concrete walls, under artificial light, in cells designed to contain both bodies and minds. There are no witnesses, no crowds, no urgency, just time. Is there a way out? Life after Supermax confinement. For inmates held inside ADX Florence, one question eventually becomes unavoidable. Is there a way out? Not just out of the prison, but out of isolation itself. Supermax confinement is often described as permanent, but technically, it is not supposed to be. The system allows for what is known as a step-down program, a gradual process designed to transition inmates out of extreme isolation and into less restrictive environments. In theory, it represents hope. In reality, it is one of the most difficult paths in the American prison system. The step-down program. The step-down program is structured around behavior. Inmates are told that if they demonstrate long-term compliance, no infractions, no emotional outbursts, no resistance, they may earn small reductions in isolation. These reductions are incremental, a little more movement, a slightly different routine, limited interaction under strict supervision. Progress is measured slowly, often over years. There is no fixed timeline, no guarantee of advancement. The system is designed to move cautiously, sometimes so cautiously that progress feels theoretical rather than real. Compliance without expression. One of the greatest challenges inmates face in the step-down process is emotional suppression. To advance, inmates must not only follow rules, they must appear emotionally stable. Anger is risky. Frustration is risky. Even visible distress can be interpreted as instability. As a result, inmates learn to hide emotion entirely. They become quiet, reserved, careful. This creates a paradox. The same isolation that damages emotional regulation is later used as evidence that an inmate is unfit to leave isolation. The weight of one mistake. Progress in the step-down program is fragile. A single infraction, even a minor one, can reverse years of compliance. Missed instructions, misunderstood commands, behavior interpreted as defiance. In Supermax confinement, there is little room for context. Setbacks are not temporary. They are cumulative. For many inmates, this creates a sense of futility, the feeling that no amount of compliance will ever be enough. Release into a new world. For the few inmates who do complete the step-down process, release from Supermax confinement is not freedom. It is transition. Moving into a less restrictive prison environment can be overwhelming. Noise, movement, and social interaction, things most people take for granted, become sources of anxiety. Simple experiences feel intense. Eating near others, hearing constant sound, making eye contact, navigating unpredictability. Some inmates struggle more outside Supermax than inside it. After years of isolation, the world feels unsafe. Institutionalization at its extreme. Supermax confinement represents institutionalization at its most intense. The structure removes choice, spontaneity, and complexity. Over time, inmates adapt by shrinking their expectations and emotional range. When that structure is removed, the absence of control can feel destabilizing. Some inmates request a return to isolation, not because they prefer it, but because it is familiar. This is one of the clearest indicators of how deeply Supermax confinement reshapes the mind. Those who never leave. Many inmates never complete the step-down program. Some are denied advancement repeatedly. Some are deemed permanently unmanageable. Some age out inside Supermax confinement. For them, isolation becomes not a phase, but a condition that defines their remaining years. They grow older behind concrete walls, largely unseen and unheard. The public distance. Supermax prisons exist far from public awareness. There are no tours, no public access, no routine transparency. This distance allows the system to function quietly, without sustained scrutiny. Most people will never know how many inmates live this way, or for how long. And that invisibility raises difficult questions. The question of purpose. Supporters argue that Supermax prisons are necessary. They point to reduce violence. They emphasize staff safety. They argue that some individuals cannot be housed anywhere else. Critics ask whether permanent isolation solves danger or simply relocates it into the mind. They question whether a system designed to remove human contact can ever produce stability, a final reality. For inmates inside Supermax confinement, the future is defined by uncertainty. Hope exists, but it is fragile. Progress is possible, but slow. Release is real, but rare. And even when it happens, the effects of isolation do not disappear. They follow. What happens inside America's Supermax prisons forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about punishment control and what it means to remove human contact entirely. Silence, control, and the cost of isolation. There are prisons meant to punish. There are prisons meant to protect. And then there are prisons designed to erase human contact almost entirely. Inside places like ADX Florence, men exist in silence, not for days, not for weeks, but for years. Lives unfold behind concrete walls where time has no shape and identity slowly fades. These facilities were built in response to fear. Fear of violence, fear of chaos, fear of losing control. And in many ways, they succeed at what they were designed to do. They isolate danger. They reduce movement. They enforce order. But they also raise questions that have no easy answers. What happens when isolation becomes permanent? When control replaces rehabilitation? When silence becomes a way of life? The men inside these cells are not symbols. They are not statistics. They are human beings, shaped by choices, consequences, and systems far larger than themselves. Whether Supermax prisons represent necessity or excess is a debate that continues quietly, far from public view. But what is clear is this: removing human contact does not just contain people, it changes them. And once that change happens, it is rarely undone. This documentary is not about sympathy or condemnation. It is about understanding the most extreme edge of the American prison system and the human cost that exists behind reinforced concrete and steel. Because what happens in silence still matters. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.